Welcome to the Period Besties Podcast with Stasha and Katie. Think about it as chatting with your best friends about all the TMI stuff you've never talked about before with two period coaches who've been helping hormones collectively for over 20 years now. I'm Stasha.
And I'm Katie, and we're pulling back the curtain on what it's like in the world of menstrual coaching. From puberty to menopause and everything in between, we're here to show you how period coaching can save the day. We'll share practical tips and information you can put to immediate use to improve your hormones and happiness.
We're removing the mystery, ending the taboo, and shining a light on just how powerful period coaching can be.
So whether you need period coaching or are considering becoming a period coach yourself, these episodes are going to help you. We'll share stories, coach live on air, and bring smart, savvy guests to share their wisdom too. Let's start today's episode.
Welcome to the Period Besties Podcast. So we know that this year is going to be quite the year, and we thought that a good way of using our cycles is to enhance your voice, your power, right? It's going to be a year where we're going to need to set firm boundaries. We're definitely going to need to problem solve this year. We're going to need to use our voices to make an difference and impact this year. We're going to need to speak up for people this year, ourselves, but also those of us who don't have a voice or the ability to speak up as loudly and clearly as they should or would. It's a little bit like, we need to have men involved in women's rights because men listen to men. And so we need to have men talking about women's rights because men will only listen to men, right? There was also a study done on how women listen to men more than they listen to other women. So we need to be able to use some of our influence behind the scenes as well to get some people like cis white men on team get stuff done for the minorities of this land. So there's just a lot that needs to be done, from standing up and speaking to attempting to get some things done behind the scenes, all that kind of stuff. So we thought we would do a little episode today, just a primer on using your voice. And then we have a great interview coming up next week on this subject as well with somebody who quite literally uses her voice, was an opera singer, like the whole 9 yards. So we'll talk more about the mechanics of it next week. But for this week, we thought, let's just talk about how we can use our cycle in order to find our voice, find our inspiration, problem solve, use our voice, that kind of thing. So we're going to go through the phases of our cycle and how they're good for finding your voice, finding your inspiration, and then for speaking as well. And then I'm going to give you guys a little insight into something that I dive in really deeply in The Revolution Will Be Bloody, which is the dirty socks principle, AKA how to problem solve with your cycle.
I'm curious to hear this one. We were talking before we jumped on just about how we run our podcast and how, ironically, we are both on day 5 of our cycle today because we're in perimenopause, and my period, the past 2 cycles have been, one was really short, then I had a very long one. So we ended up on day 5 together, and we were just talking about normally we're on the opposite ends of our cycle. So one of us might have a hard time finding the words and the other one will jump in. So I'm really interested and intrigued as we're recording through this cycle itself, like how that's going to work. But we've noticed, and you've probably noticed as well, just no matter what kind of situation you're in, whether it's with your friends, whether it's your coworkers, with clients, you might notice some days you have all the words and you have all the clarity, and other days you're just feeling a loss for emotional parts, verbiage, all of it. And you're like, wait a second, why do I feel so foggy brain? And so much of how we feel impacts our voice. And so much of where we are in our cycle really impacts that too. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation today. And I think we should talk about, do you want to start with deep luteal? Because I feel like that's like where we spend a lot of time talking about this.
Absolutely. Right. So our verbal skills are tied to our estrogen. So when you see estrogen peaks or estrogen flows in your cycle, you're going to have the ebb and flow with your verbal skills as well. And it's so clear in deep luteal because we have that little mini estrogen bump in early luteal. And then when you move into that deep luteal phase, that's where your progesterone is reducing, your estrogen is reducing, right? Everything's coming down. And that's where a lot of times we're like, oh my God, can't speak words. Like words hard. I'm trying to describe a microwave and the best I can do is hotbox. So it's definitely that deep luteal phase that your estrogen just plummets and your verbal skills plummet with it. And it's great because it's a good time for introspection, emotion reviewing, those kinds of things. But it's really not the best time if you're trying to learn something new or use your verbal skills. We can talk about menstrual cycles in every phase because Katie and I know this stuff inside and out. And even if we forget the word, we know what we're talking about and we can absolutely fill in the gaps easily. But if you're doing something for the first time, oftentimes deep luteal is not the moment to make that first venture out there, like the first speaking gig or something.
Yeah. So if you own your own business and you can schedule around your cycle, doing it in deep luteal will not be the best first thing out of the gate. I feel like sometimes I can power through if I need to, and other times I'm like that thing, right? You guys all know what I'm talking about, that thing. Whereas during ovulation,
Yeah.
I am at my peak. I'm really more extroverted. I'm more social. I really have my voice. And my husband and I talk about this a lot. And I keep seeing memes about this tone.
Mm.
I have noticed because I've been paying more attention to it because he's like, your tone is really harsh. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm saying the same thing I always say is like, no, your tone. And he can hear tone really well. And I've noticed too, if any of you, your partner or coworker or someone is like, ooh, your tone is extra harsh today. I have noticed my tone of voice in my deep luteal is way harsher. Like it's less patient is a better way to phrase it. So even tonage, if people that you work with or clients or key messaging, if you're doing Instagram lives or Instagram reels or whatever type of marketing that you're doing, pay attention to that tone as well, because I've noticed too, like my tone, because I listen back to our podcast, I can almost figure out where I'm in my cycle now that I'm paying more attention to the tone. Like right now, I'm in the beginning phase of my cycle. I'm a little bit more upbeat. My tone is a little bit more excited versus if I'm closer to my period, I can tell my tone is more dull and I sound bored, even though I'm not.
Yeah. Oh, I know my tone is a lot harsher in deep luteal for sure. Like I can hear the words coming out of my mouth and I'm like, oh, girl, you
Yeah,
didn't
I've been paying a lot
say
of
it
attention.
like that.
But my
But
husband's tone is always the same.
right? No, not at all. But you have to keep in mind that estrogen is the nurturing hormone. It makes us more tolerant and more patient and more willing to nurture and put up with stuff, which is why that's when you have kids, because otherwise you'd murder everybody. But that's why they talk about that shift in perimenopause when you come into your power, because you don't have estrogen making you more docile than after perimenopause. And then you don't have that same level of estrogen anymore. So that level of domesticity, of being docile, of letting things go, of being nurturing, all of that sort of ebbs out. And you don't have that, which is where you are in deep luteal. And something that I have said before, and I will continue to say until I die, is that our hormones most closely resemble men's hormones in deep luteal and menstrual. It's when our feminine, we'll say hormones, progesterone, estrogen are at their lowest, and our testosterone is highest in ovulation. But for a lot of people, our testosterone is a little bit higher resting rate. So you may see those feelings of aggression or lust in deep luteal and menstrual because your testosterone may be a little bit higher of a base level than your estrogen or progesterone or equal. But because those other hormones have ebbed so low, your testosterone is higher. And so every time some guy says something to me on Beyonce's internet about me being, on the rag or whatever, I'm like, well, but my hormones most closely resemble yours right now. So are you on the rag? Are we both on a rag together? But the perk of this phase is that you can really understand what's wrong. Like, what's pissing you off, what's making you angry, what boundaries you're letting people push, because in this phase, you are much less allowing. You're not letting them push that envelope so far in this phase. So it's actually a really great phase for harnessing what you're truly passionate about. Use that tone of voice and make that go live and rant about the thing that you're really passionate about. Use
100%.
that to your advantage. And if you're not sure, look, you can't advocate for everything all of the time. You can't be, if I started listing all of the things that you're supposed to be an advocate for right now, you can do bits and pieces of everything, but you can't do everything all of the time. So where are you going to focus your attention? Now, obviously, Katie and I are focusing our attention on menstrual rights, reproductive rights, those kinds of things, because that's where we've decided to build our lives, our businesses, our incomes. And that's the thing that we're passionate about. You could be passionate about human rights. You could be passionate about Black Lives Matters. You could be passionate about Palestine or genocide in general. Like, we should all be passionate about all of these things for sure. But where you're going to spend your focus, where you're going to do your research, your time to write the educated letters, to make the posts, to do all of that work, it is work. That's the thing that when your passion fuels it, it's much easier. Some people are very politically active. I've been very political. I worked on the Obama campaign in 2008. I'm very politically active. So I do spend time researching in politics and understanding what's going on and more of the nuances of what's happening, because I find that to me is where I can make some change. There's something that can be done, especially on a local level, right? So I can see the effects of work especially on a local level. So if you're in that place where you're like, gosh, I really need to make a difference this year, I just don't know what I'm going to do it at, use this deep luteal, even menstrual phase to see what you find coming up, what's making you angry, what's welling up, what is really, is it equality? Is it the treatment of people, whatever it is, but what are those things that are coming up? And then use that time to refine, to kind of figure out, okay, which direction do I want to focus in? And yes, of course, you still sign the petitions, you still put money into the GoFundMes or the whatevers, but you still, want to make the world a better place on a grand scale. But finding that place and that passion, this is the perfect time to do it when those verbal skills do diminish and you have more of that emotional reservoir to tap into.
Yeah, and it just brings a lot of clarity too. I feel like when you are just tapping into how you feel and what you mentioned too, like what's really making you angry, what's making you upset. A lot of times for me, it's like when I have too much on my plate and I'm very overwhelmed and I'm like, okay, this is not working for me anymore. It's really clear now.
Yeah.
Because I'm using my voice in a way that I know that I have less patience and I'm less tolerant and I'm a little more annoyed. So what has pushed me so far to get to this state of emotion that I'm feeling? So this is always a good place for me to reflect and then make the changes. And it happens when I hear my voice and I'm like, oh, you're really mad. You're really upset. What is it that you're actually mad? What's actually upsetting you? And we're emotional beings, so we will feel those emotions. And instead of saying, this emotion is bad, I shouldn't feel this way, reflect on why you're feeling that way. And a lot of times, the emotions, the voice, everything that comes together is the catalyst for a big change that you can actually make in your life too, versus in maybe ovulation phase, you're on like a very different lovey-dovey, like everything is rainbows and butterflies and you're just feeling different, right? Obviously pay attention to how you feel throughout the whole phase, but I feel like sometimes we discount our more aggressive anger phase because we shouldn't be feeling like that. And I feel like if you're really feeling like that, there's something deeper to reflect on and grow from that. And sometimes we get scared of those feelings and we get scared of how strong and powerful our voice is. And we are saying like our voice is our power. And this is how we can really make change. And when we're paying attention to how that's showing up within our cycle, it's really a deeper reflection of probably what is going on internally in our whole mind body.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. So when you can use that phase to start sussing out where am I letting my boundaries be trampled, or what kind of activism do I really want to invest my time, money, energy, whatever into, you come around into that menstrual phase, which I always called the why phase. So the dirty socks principle, which we'll get to in a minute, but in my teaching system, we call it what, why, how, do. And what is the luteal phase? What is pissing you off? What's making you angry? What's being trampled? What is it? And then that menstrual phase is the why. Why is it a big deal to you? Why is it so hard for you? Why is it bothering you? Whatever it is. So then you come around to follicular, which is your how phase. This is a really great phase for figuring out how to do things. It's a really practical phase in your life, in your business, and whatever it is you're working on and problem solving. And it's a really great way of going, okay, how do I want to make my voice heard? How do I want to present this information? How do I want to make that change? How do I want to have that conversation? Whatever it is. It's a great how phase. So if you've come through and you've thought, you know what, I don't really know, but I'm going to just try this one thing. Like I'm going to try using my voice to further this cause, XYZ. Then in that follicular phase, okay, well, how am I going to help further XYZ cause? And the easy answer is I'll change my Facebook picture to a black square. But the reality is that doesn't do anything. So if you really want to make an impact, how are you going to make that impact? You know, it could be, I'm not going to spend money on ads on Meta anymore, or I'm not going to click on ads anymore, or I'm not going to shop on Amazon. I'm going to cancel Prime, right? There's little things that you can do. But then there's how do I get other people involved? This is when I wrote the third section of the Revolutionary Body, which is the activism section of the book. How do you go forth and make change around this for other people? How do you make a difference? And there's a whole chapter on like green menstruation and activism and doing things and that kind of thing. And I wrote a lot of that in my follicular phase, because it's very practical. How are we going to further menstrual education for people around the world so that the world is a better place? How can we do that, right? So that follicular phase, it encourages you as well to do things that you love. It encourages you to go, okay, I like going live. I'm going to do a bunch of research and I'm going to go live and I'm going to share what I found out, or I'm going to do a bunch of recording, or I'm going to talk to friends, or I'm going to host a tea at my house and I'm going to have everybody make menstrual kits for the women's shelter, whatever it is. So there's a lot of things that you can do. And the follicular phase is a really good time to come up with ideas, figure it out. And then of course, ovulation is our do phase. Go do the live in ovulation, do the charity work in ovulation, do volunteer, whatever it is. But ovulation is a really good time to do it. And it's when your estrogen is highest. So it's when your verbal skills are highest. And I will say asterisk that for some people who have hormonal imbalances or ADHD, ovulation or other neurodiversities, ADHD and other things can be aggravated in ovulation. So some people like to wait until their early luteal phase to do
Makes sense.
their outspoken stuff, right? But for most of us, ovulation is the time. Go knock it out of the park, go do that speech, give that presentation, go live, go volunteer, whatever it is, because that's usually when our verbal skills peak and our energy peaks. And for those of you who find that in ovulation, you're too scattered, it's crazy, and things aren't coming out right, whatever, then just early luteal. Give yourself a couple days after ovulation for the estrogen to come down, and then do its second wave bump in early luteal, and then go forth and do it. So just little asterisks there.
Yeah, that makes actually a lot of sense with the ADHD. Yeah.
Yeah. I found it a lot in clients and I found it a lot in my friends. And even I have times where I'm like, oh, I am just humming at too high a vibration right now to actually like, do anything useful. So
yeah. And for me, it comes across as like just being very overstimulated. I use that word a lot just because I'm overstimulated a lot. It's loud in my house, but I've noticed too being a little bit more sensitive to that during ovulation, during perimenopause than I was before. Like right now, thank goodness, because my husband's out of town. I'm in the first phase of my cycle. I can handle a little bit more of the noise level. But I noticed that too a lot, like in terms of communication with my cycle, with being a mom too. It's definitely something that I'm constantly challenged with as my cycle is changing and my patience is changing, and just trying to keep that even tone when it comes to my kids and that even voice when it comes to my kids. That's something for anyone else that has children and our pets, right? Like it's definitely something to think about because kids hear tone of voice probably more than any like adults. Like they really can feel the emotion behind it. I can say the same thing that I always say, and they can be like, ooh, like jars them. And I'm like, I didn't say anything differently, but it just comes off across very differently. So just keep that in mind too. Just for me, I'm like, okay, take a deep breath before I say what I need to say, work in progress. But I definitely notice that too with kids. Like they definitely hear it more than, I don't know if my clients would be able to know.
mm-hmm.
You know, that mask that you can put on when you're working.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a chapter in the upcoming book on working with your clients with your cycle. So I've spent a lot of time analyzing this myself and other people because I was going to write this chapter of the book in the new book. So
Wait, I want to hear the dirty socks principle.
Okay, so the dirty
before we say bye.
Yeah. So the dirty socks principle is what would Hermione do, regardless of the author being a crazy bigot? Hermione is a brilliant lady. So we'll just focus on Hermione. Ron and Harry would both be dead in the first book if it weren't for her. So what would Hermione do is the smart way of managing problems with your cycle. And so the dirty socks principle is you and your partner have an agreement. You do the laundry. That's just what you've decided in your household. You'll do the laundry. Your partner, I don't know, does the dishes, whatever. It doesn't matter. The dirty socks, though, never make it into the dirty clothes bin. The dirty socks are on the floor. The dirty socks are by the shower. The dirty socks never make it into the hamper. And every month you are like, I'm going to murder my spouse with a spoon, a rusty spoon, in fact, so that in case I doesn't kill them in the first attempt, they die of sepsis down the line. Like you're just so angry that you're plotting murder, revenge, whatever. Sometimes you scream and fight about it. Sometimes you just smolder in silence. But however it comes up, it's this reoccurring thing that every month in your deep luteal phase, you're like, I'm going to murder this person over dirty socks. Okay. Dirty socks principle. So in your luteal phase, your what phase, you know what's wrong. The dirty socks. Your job is to do the laundry, but your job is not to pick up the laundry off the floor from your slob of a spouse, right? That is not your job, or your kids or whomever. So you know what's the problem. The problem is that the dirty socks are just never making it into the hamper, and you need to figure out this problem before you're in jail. Orange does not look good on you. Don't do it. So you go into your menstrual phase, which is your why phase, and you sit down and you pull out a journal or a voice recorder or whatever, and you go, okay, why does the dirty socks on the floor make me homicidal? Why do I want to murder over socks? The rest of the month, I don't want to murder over socks, but this phase, I want to murder over socks. So why do I want to murder over socks? Well, because I'm not their mom. My job is not to pick up after my partner. I have to pick up my kids' socks, but I don't have to pick up my partner's socks. Like, I'm not your mom. I'm not the maid. I don't get paid. My job is not to get the socks into the hamper, for the love of God. So why? Because I'm feeling like I'm being the mother to my partner. I'm not supposed to be my partner's mom. I'm supposed to be in a partnership. This person is supposed to respect me as an equal, and I am not feeling equal, right? So you get right down into the heart of the matter in that menstrual phase. You're not going to do anything about it just yet. You're going to go into your follicular phase and you're going to go, okay, how do I have this discussion with my partner? Now, this is how you know your partner best. So how does your partner hear best? Out on a hike, at the bar with a pint, at dinner, at breakfast? I don't know. Are they a morning person, a night person? Like, how do they hear best? You theoretically should know, right? So how are you going to have this conversation with your partner? You're going to plan it. You're going to put it together. You're going to make it the most agreeable situation for your partner to have their listening ears on. Whatever you have to do to set that up. And then in ovulation, you're going to have that conversation. And we can drop in a little bit about the stripper study on how women who were ovulating got larger tips. People wanted to give them things during ovulation. But the fact remains that in ovulation, your requests will more likely be met with a listening ear, right? Yes. So you're going to have this conversation in ovulation. So what, why, how, do? What's bothering me in luteal? Why is it bothering me in menstrual? How are you going to have that conversation in follicular? And then having the conversation in ovulation. And theoretically, you're going to do this with this problem. You're going to have a really good conversation about it, and you'll probably have to have it in another 2 months. But I'm willing to bet that over time, you have that conversation less and less, and you're felt more, but then other things will come up, right? So you're going to repeat this process with problems, because this is ultimately just a problem-solving process. And in the business book coming out, I've done an entire new version of it where you're deciding whether or not to fire a problem client. It's a problem client principle this time, but you're going to use the same principle to manage those problems, to have those conversations. And it's the same thing with, this is how you use your voice in the most effective way possible to make an actual impact with as little going back to the drawing board as possible. Because every time you yell at your partner in that luteal phase, nothing changes, right? Because you're just yelling, it's crying, it's a mess, nothing changes. Everyone's just traumatized. So nothing actually gets solved or changes. And then, you divorce. When in the reality of the situation is maybe that is, because if you're doing this problem solving process and you're having this conversation over and over again, then this is a partner who just does not see you as an equal, and there you are. But at least you have tried. You've given it your best effort with all of the tools available to you. And if this is a partner who actually loves you, they'll figure it out and they'll get their shit together and they'll come and figure it out with you. And you'll solve a lot more problems along the way as well. So it's just a good way of finding out what's really bothering you, why it's really bothering you. And then you can have a far more effective conversation at a time where you're both actually able to converse rather than it be an emotionally charged, traumatizing, potentially situation.
Yeah. And I feel like I love the way you laid that out, because it feels like you can really find your voice and you're not just being reactive. Yes. Where a lot of times we are just reactive versus like, let me really think this through and then use my voice in a powerful way when I'm feeling my best. So I love that. And I love that Monifa is going to be on next week, because we had such a great conversation with her about her work with voice and her clients. So this is just a great start of this whole series of just really finding your voice and your flow with your cycle, because we're going to really dive into business with flow and work with flow. So this is a really great start for that whole entire series. So buckle up, get ready for some really, really different ways to work with your cycle that you've probably not thought about before, and really finding your voice. And this is so important in any relationship, right? In your personal relationship with yourself, we can be kinder to ourselves when we know where we are in our phase and how we're speaking to ourselves. We also have to be really mindful of our own voice throughout our cycle too, and the words that we're saying to ourselves. And whether you work for yourself, you work for a company, whether you are doing some work this year advocating for other people, you're advocating for yourself. This is like so, so, so powerful.
Even work from home. I had a woman who had 5 kids and would joke that her husband was her 6th, who joined my business program because she was like, I need to figure out how to run my household more efficiently and effectively. And I've decided that I'm going to come in, I'm going to do your business program, and I'm going to figure out how to run my household with my cycle so that it is a streamlined, amazing powerhouse. And she did. She knocked it out of the ballpark. She used every single one of those business principles for her house, for her kids.
Yeah. I mean, it makes total sense. I feel like.
And it was genius. I was like, you are a genius. Well done.
Yeah, it makes total sense because I want things to get done. Do it when people are listening to you. Every day I'm like, we need to have a conversation about this. Let's have a conversation about this. Sometimes they're like, I don't want to have a conversation about this. I'm like, we're going to talk about this. Like, so important.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear where you find your voice, how you find your voice, what you thought was most interesting about the different phases and your voice, and especially your tone, because I think that's something we don't talk enough about, the tone. And we can't wait to see you in our next episode. So thanks for joining us, besties. Bye for now.
A big shout out and thank you to our sponsors for today's episode, Period Coaching School and Katie Bressack Wellness.
Thanks to you, our favorite bestie, for listening to the Period Besties Podcast, where no topic is TMI. And of course, share this episode with your besties.
Remember to leave us a 5-star review, nothing less than the best for us besties, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can follow us on Instagram at Stasha Washburn and at Katie Bressack, or email us at periodbestiespodcast@gmail.com.
Check out more about us at katiebressack.com and periodcoachingschool.com. And of course, check the show notes for free goodies and extras that support this episode.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Bye for now, besties.